where I saw him. He was 27 years old. He was in the prime of his career, and he was the elite of the elite.
And that's how you got hooked.
I got hooked behind the thing. I went there the next day. I signed up, and I was there every fucking day, every day. Yeah, I became obsessed.
Interesting.
So I didn't want to do anything that fucked me up. And my friend Jimmy, his cousin, was selling coke, and I knew his cousin Mike from like when he wasn't selling coke. Like he was a mechanic, he's a cool guy, fixed my car for me. He was a fucking guy from the neighborhood. We hang out with him. And then him and his girl got into coke bad. He was selling coke, and then he was just emaciated. He looked like he got bit by a vampire. And they would hide they had an attic apartment. They would just go in that attic apartment and do coke every day. And I was like, fuck coke.
That's hardcore to get like hooked like that.
He got hooked. Well, he was also selling it.
Yeah.
So he had all this access to coke. But it was people in the neighborhood. I saw them doing coke, and they just wanted to do coke all the time. They wanted to get out and do coke. And as a kid who was like, finally, I was a loser my whole life. And then finally, when I was 15, I found this thing that I got obsessed with that changed the way people looked at me. Like now all of a sudden I was good at something, like really good at something. And then I became state champion 4 years in a row, and I won the U.S. Open, and I won these national tournaments, and it was a big fucking deal for me. So I was like, I'm not doing anything that jeopardizes that.
Right.
And coke to me was the big one. Like I knew that was it. I feel like if I got drunk, in which I did occasionally, I would feel like shit the next day. I couldn't train well. I was hungover, and I'd get beat up in sparring. I was like, I can't do this. So I just cut most partying. Like I smoked pot a handful of times. I got drunk a handful of times during high school and in my early 20s. And then in the comedy world, coke was a problem with there too. I saw when I used to work at Nick's Comedy Stop in Boston.
Yeah, sure.
And they offered to pay me in coke or money. Like when you work there for a weekend, like you want to get paid in coke or you want to get paid in money?
And even trade, like same amount of coke, the dollar
some guys
value?
went half-half. Yeah, some guys went half-half.
I guess if you like it, it's easy access.
There were so many guys that got hooked on coke. I knew so many guys that had coke problems that I was like, that is a pitfall. Like I wanted to succeed. And I felt like that was one, and also it was a drug that got you hyped up. And I liked being hyped up. And my friend Jimmy said this to me, he goes, don't do coke, you'll like it. I was like, oh, no. I'll never forget this. It was me and my friend Steve. We were driving home from Kelly's Roast Beef in Revere, Massachusetts.
Yep.
And we're
overrated.
Yeah, it's a little overrated.
The beef is, but
yeah, the clams are pretty good.
Yeah.
So we were driving, and there was a car next to us, and they had the dome light on, and there was a girl in the back seat doing blow off a mirror. So she's there doing blow, and she looks over at us, and I'm looking over to her, and she goes, just for no reason.
Yeah.
Just fuck you.
I mean, that's Revere Beach.
But that's coke too.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was like, no coke. And then I also had another buddy who got arrested who was selling coke. And he got arrested for murder. And this was a scary murder where they beat.
How close were you with this guy?
He's a training partner of mine.
Yeesh.
Yeah, I knew him very well. I don't think he did that murder. He might have did that murder. He did some shit. He wound up going to jail. He went to jail for quite a long time, quite a few years, and then he came out, and he was just a totally different person. He came out super jacked, and he had a bunch of like really bad tattoos, and all of them were now these heavy keloid scars. Like he had like burned off his tattoos or cut off his tattoos or some shit. I don't know what he did in prison. He was real vague about it, but when he came out, like he was a fucking different human. He was an animal. You didn't want, if you sparred him, like when we sparred, they weren't sparring matches. They were fights. Like they were full on fights. Like we would spar like we were trying to kill each other. It was very dangerous. And I knew he was selling coke and doing coke. And then he got arrested for this murder where they took this guy. And again, I don't know if he did it. But he did get arrested and then released. They broke all the bones in this guy's body with a hammer, and they kept injecting him with cocaine to keep him awake.
What?
Yeah. And then they cut his hands off, and they cut his head off, and then they left his body somewhere. And I think the idea of cutting his hands off was to hide his fingerprints. And then this dude got arrested for that crime. And I was like, geez. So it was more evidence to me like coke is fucking crazy business.